All right, welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. Today we're going to talk about Love is Blind, season 6, episodes 7 and 8. And with me today, I have special guest Samantha Siffring. Samantha, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Samantha Siffring. I'm a business coach. I'm also the host of the Simple Online Business podcast and recently published a book called That Compels, all about writing your own content and marketing. And I am also a reality TV super fan. So, any opportunity I have to come on a podcast and talk about something totally different than business in the reality TV space, I am jumping all over. So, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it was so fun because, when I have guests on, I start exploring their work in more depth. And I was like, oh my God, this is all the materials I didn't know I needed ahead of time. Because I know of
Mhm.
you, but I hadn't dug in. And I was like, oh, so thank you in that regard, because now I have new listens as well.
Great.
But tell me, what is your history watching Love is Blind? I know you're a super fan.
Yeah. So I have been watching since the very beginning. And actually, when I first started watching it, it was a day that I was supposed to fly out of town to go to a coach conference that was then canceled because of COVID. And I was like about to leave to go to the airport, got the notification it was canceled, and like set down my suitcase and got on the couch and started watching Love is Blind season one. And have watched every season as it's come out ever since and really enjoy it.
That sounds similar to mine because I was like, well, definitely was during COVID. Definitely I've watched every episode. I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh, I am hooked. So,
Yes.
yes. And I would say, I don't know about you, but I was like, oh, they're leaning more into reality TV. I'm like, this was probably the most train wrecky. I can think of a couple other seasons that were, but
Yeah.
this one they're like leaning into like the dumpster fire things that are happening. So,
Yes. Yeah. It feels a little less of the we're trying to have genuine relationships succeeding coming out of this and more
mhm.
like this can propel your career. So I think that's kind of disappointing to see that happening. And I hope that they're able to kind of curb some of that because it felt so unique at the beginning.
Oh, it definitely did. Because I feel like this season they're like, fine, we'll give you Amy and Johnny. You should be
Yeah.
happy with that. And everybody else, well, we'll see. Because I
Yeah.
mean, you hear rumors on other seasons of like, oh, there were other couples that got together and had a love
Yeah.
story and etc. So I don't know. Yeah, I was also hoping that they would stay more on the love track because I watched all the other ones and I was like, but this one seemed different. And now it is just the same. So
Mhm.
what are you gonna do? Well, anything else on your mind before we jump in to the juicy details of these episodes?
I don't think so. I'm ready to dive in.
Yes. Okay. Well, okay. So, as a reminder, in episodes 7 and 8, we start in the Dominican Republic. They're still in vacation mode. They're still seemingly evaluating each other to see if they want to stay together, but most of them seem very committed, or at least mentally. And then in episode 8, we return to Charlotte, North Carolina, where they're with their friends, family, jobs, and most importantly, for some of them, their phones. So,
Mhm.
we're back in the day to day life. Well, let's dive right in. Probably Dominican Republic makes sense. Was there anything in particular from this episode that just like sticks in your brain?
Yeah, I think this episode, it seemed like we started to get some things coming up that would then grow in the next episode. I'm thinking about Clay starting to reveal his I'm afraid to cheat. I'm worried about how I'm going to be in a relationship with just one woman. That I think that was the first time that we had heard him talk about
Yeah.
that. And then the conversation between Kenneth and AD. And you could just kind of see him processing that. I think that may have happened on the prior episode when they had the
Mm,
conversation, but then this is where you could start to see a little fallout from it in that
yeah.
or in the Dominican Republic episode. So those are the main things that really stuck out to me in this episode that we were just starting to see some cracks in some of these relationships.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, because it's like now they're like, okay, we're together. I've gotten over the initial shock of seeing you, and now I'm trying to really see you. I'm trying to see how we would be together. I'm trying to
Mhm.
ask you like hard questions without being like maybe more of an interrogation, but they're like, I want to know like how you're going to fight with me. I'm going to want to know
Mhm.
what your day-to-day life is like. And of course, like at this stage of their relationship, everybody's putting their best foot forward or trying to. And so it's
Mhm.
like, how are you supposed to both evaluate, but also, decide, make a huge decision about what comes next? So, well, maybe do you want to talk about Clay first and that whole
Yeah.
scene with AD?
Yeah. Let's talk about
Yeah.
it.
So what I grabbed from that scene, that you were talking about, Samantha, was, Clay and AD well, he's having some Slurpee soup on the beach and she's having
Mhm.
her salad. And he just dives into like, he talks about like not wanting to let her down, not wanting to be that guy. And for AD, she's like super shocked in this scene because it seems like it comes out of left field. And even just rewatching that, I thought I would see something different, but I was like, no, like she is super shocked that he is like revealing these things. You can kind of tell that she's trying to hold back a little bit and listen, but I think she's also maybe freaking out a little bit. I don't know. Did you pick up on that at all?
Yeah, yeah, I thought so too. It seemed like one of those moments where you're like smiling and nodding, like, yeah, I'm trying to look normal. And inside you're like trying to process something really shocking. It seemed like she was really trying to figure that out. And then he starts stacking the plates and she just looks like even more like, what is happening right now?
Well, absolutely. Because, I think, and I mean, maybe they talked about this in the pods, but it seemed like it was new information for her. It
Yeah.
was like less about sharing information, like, hey, I just want to tell you about my family history with my dad cheating, and more about like, and now I'm worried that I have some of the same, qualities in me. I'm not sure, but I've never seen like a healthy relationship. I've never seen like you know, um, anyone who hasn't cheated on their partner before. And now I'm like, I am afraid that this is even a thought in my head. And she's like
Mhm.
agreeing, like, yes, I am also afraid that this is a
We're
thought in
both
your head.
afraid. And this to me felt like a pod conversation. So I I don't know. Maybe it was edited. It didn't seem like it was edited out from her reaction. It seemed like this was the first time she was hearing it. But I don't know what good reason he would have for not bringing it up in the pods, because people do get really deep in the pods typically about family trauma and
Mm.
relationship history and all of that. It is hard to not look at it and think it was an intentional leaving out of information on his part to be able to progress further in the process. So it to me feels like another red flag against
Yeah.
Clay.
Why do you think he brought it up now and maybe he didn't bring it up in the pods?
So I wonder, I don't know why he would have brought it up now versus later or
Mm-hmm.
never, but I wonder if you bring it up in the pods, do you worry that the person's going to break up with you and go with someone else? And then you don't get as much screen time and potential to, like, he's an entrepreneur, grow your business,
Right. Right.
or just like your fame. Um, so that's kind of what I wondered. Like, do you get edited out of the show or less screen time if you reveal something like that earlier on in the pods versus later on or never?
Oh, that is fascinating. I actually never thought about it from that point of view, but I'm surprised I didn't because I've watched The Bachelor so many times where they
Mm-hmm.
really hold their cards in and it's just like, okay. And also, Clay seems so clueless about the whole show in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it does make me wonder though, like why in that moment, I'm like, is he just like, whatever this is on my mind, I'm going to share this with you? Or like, I was kind of wondering like what type of conversation he was hoping to have by putting that out there.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering because
Do you
she
think he
doesn't
even
necessarily pick
thought?
it up.
Yeah,
Hmm.
did he even think about it? Because I could also see maybe you just get like swept up in everything in the pods and then you get engaged. It's so exciting. And then when you're on this vacation, it starts to sink in. Wait, I'm engaged. That's leading to a wedding. I actually have all of these reservations about getting
Mhm.
married and marriage itself that I didn't think about before. Like, I'm not somebody who wouldn't think multiple steps down the road. So it's hard to relate to somebody who's like so in the moment, but that's also possible that it just like came up and he was like, well, this is my partner I'm going to share.
Well, I wonder too is if, and I think I've seen many different places online, people talking about how basically they put AD into the role of like his therapist, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, you're an extension of all of this like self-help that I seem to want in my life right now.
Yeah.
Um, and so maybe it was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, I'll bring this to you. Maybe we can make sense of it, which I don't think is wrong. Like, it's not like it's a bad thing
Mm-hmm.
to want to talk about that with your partner. Um, it's this is where I would want somebody to bring me the doubts. I would want somebody to bring that, but it's also such a tender place and
Yeah.
there's so much pressure. So it's like, I want, I agree with you. I don't know that he thought through how she was going to receive that information, but what do you, how would you help Clay in this situation? Or like, what would you say that could be like helpful for him? Because obviously this is his biggest roadblock to actually moving forward with AD in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the thing I struggle with in something like this is I just consistently see people go on these shows who have so many unresolved issues with relationships. I think
Mm,
Chelsea is another strong
yeah.
example in this cast of somebody who I think has a lot of past trauma that has led to them showing up the way that they do in relationships. And it's easy to label them a bad person. And I've
Right.
seen that online so much. These people get so much hate. And I just know the inner workings, they are so less aware, most likely, of how they show up in a relationship than it seems like they are. And like, oh, why would you not like go to therapy and resolve some of this
Uh,
stuff before you're having a international audience watch all of your worst patterns play out? So
well,
I think my
maybe if
advice is like, don't go on the show.
right, don't go on the though.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we've over on our a little beach over here been talking about that. Like, oh no, like the more evaluation is needed, please,
Yeah.
please. And I wonder in his case if it's just like you don't know what you don't know. Like
Yeah.
he started saying it out loud and he's just like, oh, he seems shocked a lot of the times. Like, I can't believe this has impacted me in this way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what makes it hard too is like once you're on a show like this, you're in, you signed a contract, you don't get an out.
Yeah.
And
It's too
like
late.
it's too late. And I do wonder about the long-term damage that some of these cast
Mhm.
members have because now they've identified they need to work on this, but they're having like this moment in the public where it's like, oh no, I've got to deal with this. This is flying at me. I am in, like total survival mode, trying to handle getting a death threat, right? Trying to handle all these other things.
Yeah.
Um, I can imagine that kind of layers on the trauma where you're like, well, now I don't want to look at that because every time I think about it, I think about the show and I think about what happened to me. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, Clay talks a lot about working with a therapist, and I know like he has mentioned that now, and well, we can just say like in present
Yeah.
episodes and stuff too. I'm glad that he has somebody for that because this
Yeah.
could have been kind of a make or break kind of situation.
Yeah. And he also, since you mentioned it, has mentioned that he's now seeking out role models that have healthy
Mm,
relationships that he can look up to. And I think ultimately that's the best move because if it's something that you can't even picture because
yeah,
you haven't seen it modeled, figure out how to be able to picture it if that's what
yeah,
you really want. And I think people are able to break cycles. You know,
yeah.
there's so many people, I think, especially in this generation, who just have more awareness of these family cycles and generational cycles that they want to break.
Mm.
And there's so much more support and so many more resources for that now. So I'm glad he's seeking it out. I think that's the best move for him.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I had like in my little notebook, I was like, oh, he has a vision board. And I
That
just
was
think he
so
didn't know.
adorable. I loved it.
I love that he like and this is like in the scene where he's showing AD around his home. He's just like, yes, my vision board. Like he's so
Hmm.
excited and proud of it. I was like, I love that. And I think
Yeah.
that's such a good point though for him is just like he didn't know that he needed role models in that area. And I think
Hmm.
again, it's like you don't know what you don't know. Now this has been highlighted for him and he's just like, oh, I see. Just because I haven't seen it, it doesn't mean it's out there. I just haven't been exposed and now I can.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and like one of the questions that comes up constantly on this show and other dating reality shows is like, well, is this person actually ready for marriage? And
Hmm.
it's, he's thinking about that for himself. I'm like, but how does somebody ever even decide if you're ready or not? And like what evaluation tools you use? I don't know.
Yeah. And if you think about like marriage in the past, I think current generations are putting so much more thought into it
Mm,
than ever before. And I think there's positives and negatives to it. And I think it's maybe kind of a personal thing. Like
mm,
what is marriage to you? What do you want it to be? I think it is a very personal thing, and different people want different things from it, but the are they ready? Are they mature enough? Like all of those things always really entertain me and get me thinking
yeah.
because I got married very young. I was 21, and I think back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I would never recommend any 21-year-old get married. Like, why? Why would they do that? But also, I've been happily married now for 16 years. So it's like, well, it worked. It
Right.
has been working. And I think like we've just been willing to put in the work
Yeah.
and nurture the relationship and stay a team and stay on the same page. So I think a lot of the readiness is in are the flaws of this person things that you're willing to live with
Mm,
forever or for as long as the relationship
yeah.
lasts? And are you ready to really be a team with this person? And I think that like that could be no at age 60 or yes
Right.
at 20. So um yeah, I always wonder that. And I wonder, like, we don't know the inner workings of these people
No.
really. So it's hard to gauge that just from what they say and do.
Absolutely. Well, and I wonder too, is like as you were talking and like talking about like how much more like resourced we are in this like more
Mm-hmm.
of a younger generation. Um, I'm wondering if we'll start to see it in the future working against some people though, of like, oh, I have to do all this work before I can meet my person. And I have to be
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote like a perfect, like ready person who has dealt with all of my things ahead of time. Um, if that's going to be something that starts holding them back too, of like, oh, like forgetting that you can also heal in the community of, your spouse and other humans and all of that. Like you don't have to go it alone. Because I'm sure you see that a lot with your clients too, of like, well, I have to be ready before
My
I can
gosh,
put
yes.
myself out there in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think you're right. And yeah, thinking back on my whole experience, there was some ways that I had like grown and processed through some things, but had a lot of past experiences, childhood experiences, relationships that I saw modeled as a child coming into marriage that were not healthy for a healthy marriage and
Mm,
not going to contribute to having a healthy marriage. So like been so much growth and processing
yeah.
and healing and all of that that I've had to do and have been able to do in a relationship because we have the dynamic where that's okay. It's okay for us to
Mhm.
both be growing and changing.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, and you see this happening in both of these episodes, is people are really trying to figure out how they line up in terms of values and how they handle their
Mhm.
finances and
Yeah.
when they do or do not want to get pregnant and all of those things. So I think these are the first episodes we're actually seeing them going, oh wait, this is a reality. This is
Yeah.
happening. And like, where are you at on these things? And where are we probably, possibly going to have fissures there? I mean, you see that with like not to jump ahead too much, but like Amy and Johnny talk about that in terms of
Mhm.
their money. And Johnny's just like, I want to retire early. I want to do this and that. And she's like, yeah, I like that. But also, let's not forget to be present in the
Yeah.
moment. And, and I think it works for them. Um, but if she was like, no, I'm a spender and I don't save any money and I'm actually in this crazy amount of debt, it possibly wouldn't have mattered how in love they were if they weren't
Mhm.
willing to talk through it and figure out a strategy that would work for them. Because I'm like, love gets you so far,
Yes. But you
but
do
there's
need
more
to be
to
on the
it.
same page on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. He felt very rigid to me in that conversation about the like, I want to retire early, so I'm going to have this like
Mhm.
super lean lifestyle. It seemed very much like, this is what I'm doing. Are you going to get on board with what I'm doing? And
Yeah.
it seems like even with the pregnancy conversation that was kind of how it went. Like his word was the word in their relationship, and I guess she's okay with it.
It was hard to tell because I felt like the storyline they were giving us with Amy and Johnny is we're happy, we're in love, we have no
Mm-hmm.
problems or any fights.
Yeah.
And we are basically the measuring stick as to which you can see how the other couples are doing. Like it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
here's proxy for a good relationship and everyone else. But yeah, I wondered, it made me think, I wonder if Johnny's a part of like the fire community, like the
Mm-hmm.
financial independence retire early, where it is very, very focused on the number, can be quite rigid, has people not living in the moment, thinking like, okay, when I'm retired, it might be at 34, then I will
Mm-hmm.
live. And for him, his number
Mm-hmm.
was 50. Um, yeah, I got that sense too, or he's like, yeah, but here's the
Mm-hmm.
plan I have in my head. It, I guess to me, I wondered if that was just maybe a symptom of like, I have been handling my own stuff and my money for so long, and I just haven't included somebody else in this before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that is, from what I've seen with friends, acquaintances, that's a challenge that I have noticed in couples who have gotten married later than me, which was
Mm,
like right out of college, essentially. I think, when you have already established your life and your way of doing things, instead of like, we're both new adults together, let's figure it out together. I think that there is like an adjustment period. And I think a lot of those things come out on this show.
yeah. I think they come out a lot in the show, and I think like for them, and I think were they the only couple that really talked a lot about money?
Yeah, I don't think I remember anybody else talking about money, which seemed weird because it's been such a big issue on other seasons.
Yeah, yeah. That just occurs to me now because I know, yeah, it has been issues in other seasons. And I mean, they are about to approach something that, like, even if you keep it separate, you're still running in tandem with each other when it comes to
Hmm.
money, if you plan to
And
live together and like merge in
yeah,
that way.
and like even if you're technically keeping it separate, you're also not always. Like if you're buying a
Right.
house together, you are now in a business transaction together. And
Mm.
yeah, I think it is a business transaction getting married in many ways. Even if that's not our primary thought about it, it's a reality of it.
Yeah, there's a contract involved. And I always appreciate when people say things like, you know what, like, here's a, if you don't create your own prenup, you get one from the
Hmm.
state and they get to
Yes.
decide how your like contract works with your marriage. And
Yeah.
actually, it's interesting. I don't know. There's maybe been one couple ever that talked about having a prenup or having any sort of agreement ahead of
Yeah.
time. And have you ever
That's
heard any?
so weird. No, now that we're talking about it, I'm like, oh no, this is really worrying me about these people. Like anybody who goes on this show should really make sure that they have a prenup, because I was thinking through like, if you were going into a business partnership, if you were going to buy a large percentage, like if you're going to be buying 50% of somebody's business and becoming their 50-50 partner, you would be looking for, where's the profit and loss for every year of business? Tell me about the cash flow. Show me all the things. Do you have a
Yeah.
business plan? And obviously, being a human and life, is a little different, but they don't seem to talk about any of that. And
No.
maybe they just don't show it, but I wish they would, because it's real.
Well, I think, and this is what I like about kind of what you're talking about before, is like mental health has been so normalized, at an
Mm-hmm.
earlier age and people have more access, but you don't hear the money conversations on these shows. And that's where I feel like a lot of people get held back in life is because you just learn from your parents. And if they have their own trauma around money and their own
Mm-hmm.
way of doing things that doesn't support you as a human being, how you want to go on your own world, um, I mean, our at least in the US, our culture is like very much just like take on a pile of debt to go to school, take on debt to get everything that you want. And so like when they're taking on each other, which let's be honest, it's a whirlwind to get to the altar. I think they sign paperwork if they both
Mhm.
say yes. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah. I
Like,
think it's legally a real marriage if they
oh my
both say
God.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's alarming.
It's quite alarming. Yeah, I'm pretty sure half of them have not even considered it. I mean, they're probably so overwhelmed with all the other details. Like, what's one more contract? It's not as crazy as the love is blind contract. So therefore,
That's true. It probably isn't.
no. Um, so I don't know. I guess if there was one area I wish they would draw out more is people just talking about that side of things, because I think it's a very normal thing in relationships that you would get into. And yet we just as like a society don't talk about it as a lot.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I feel like it gets talked about more in like the circles I've put myself in, but like growing up, I don't remember anybody really like, oh, this is how we as a couple talk about money in our marriage. No.
Mm-mm. No, no. It feels like I do wonder, like, is it a cultural thing that's changing, or is it just the communities that we're in that have that norm? I don't know.
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I imagine for you, like being like talking to business owners
I
constantly,
talk
like
about money every day.
I know I've already had at least one conversation with clients today about money, about like
Hmm.
how they think about money. So, but yeah, if you aren't in those worlds, it's like we don't talk about salary, pretend you don't
Hmm.
have debt, that kind of thing. I think that's just it's really prominent, I guess, more in my traveling community since I travel full time in my RV.
Hmm.
It's like we're with other younger nomads, and how do you make this lifestyle work is, a constant question. So, like,
Yeah.
the more open you are, the more helpful you can be to your peers. So, but yeah, if you're just, you know, living more, I guess, conventionally, maybe it wouldn't come up as much because it's just like, oh, this is just the norm. You just go to work and
Hmm.
then you come home, that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to be thinking about this prenup thing well after this conversation,
Me
Samantha.
too.
I'm like, it's up here. It's up here.
All these
Um,
shows, that's all I'm gonna think about.
Whereas Vanessa Lachey is like, when are you having babies? Chop, chop, chop. She's like, we haven't talked about that part. Um, well, what else? I mean, we've kind of quickly jumped away. Was there anything else with Clay and AD you wanted to make sure we talked about before we jump onto any other couples?
I think the main thing is there's been so much hate on Clay, and there really have been red flags with Clay, but I just am really rooting for him. Like,
Mm,
I want him to heal this and be okay. It seems like that's what he wants. And of course, AD is amazing. I feel like AD is the star of this
yeah.
season. So I hope both of them are happy and healthy, whether it's together or not in the future. However that relationship ends up for them, I hope that they both are okay.
Yeah. I feel the same way. I would agree. I have loved AD through and through, like both when she's trying to navigate relationships, but also just her like friendships with the other cast members
Mhm.
and how she just like calls people out and like says the
Mhm.
most hilarious things. Like it's all
Yeah.
good. But yeah, I mean, this is again why I don't know. Oh, the internet, like poor Clay. Like
Yeah.
here is he generously sharing his story online, and yet then you get the rest of it.
Mhm.
But I mean, most of these people would not make the show if there wasn't at least one or two things that they would throw out as red flags. And so, like, of
Yeah.
course, those are going to be highlighted. Oh,
Yes. Yeah. So those are my thoughts on them. I
yes.
don't have as positive feelings about everyone on the cast.
Do tell.
um, you had made a little note about Jeremy and Laura, and they're I feel like we didn't see as much of them over
Yeah.
these past two episodes. So I don't know that I was having as strong of a feeling towards him before I had seen all of the more current things, but I
Mm,
felt that there was even some weirdness in these episodes. Um, just like they had this fight where they had then, it seemed like, split up that night, and then
yeah.
they came back together to talk about it the next morning. And he like he at the end of it, I guess then was just like, yeah, we're the strongest couple. Like it felt like, no, you said that you wanted to go home and seemed like you were pulling
Yeah.
out of this, and now you're the strongest couple. Like that, his whole approach in that conversation just really got all of my red flags flying and being like, something is just off here.
Yeah. There was a few couples that brought up we're the top couple or we're like the best, strongest couple
Hmm.
here. I'm curious about why it's a competition, who's
Yeah.
evaluating how they decided. Like, I really just wanted to pull, I think it was Jeremy who said that him aside and be like, based on what? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like what are you seeing that I'm not? Because I also see a lot of red flags in this. Yeah, I feel like we didn't see the whole story there. It was hard for me to decide based on editing if there was a side I should take. I'm like, should I go with mom or dad here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what did you think of that scene? Because they're sitting at the end of the pier, they're discussing the fight. I didn't really see that they actually talked it through. It was mostly like, I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Let's get married.
Yeah. Yeah. It seemed like, oh, Laura had said something like, I have been so positive about our relationship and us moving forward, and now I'm not sure. And and then it seemed like very quickly they were like, oh, we're good. And
Hmm.
I couldn't figure out what had happened there. And I think you're right. It had to be things edited out. We did not see that full conversation because it didn't make sense. It actually even felt to me like something like they were on the verge of breaking up and then had a conversation about, well, let's just like go through the motions to get through this. But they didn't show that part in the middle, and then they just showed the going through the motions
Yeah.
after, because it just didn't check out. Why why are we okay now, just because we
Right.
decided to be okay? Like there's no resolution.
No resolution. I mean, if they had stayed together, I was like thinking to myself, oh, we're going to see variations on a theme of this fight over and over again, because it's not like they made amends and said, okay, please help me understand like your side of things. Let me understand where you're coming from. Here's, okay, I like really hear what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm going to try to do better in X, Y, and Z specific way or whatever, like however somebody wants to work through it. But it was mostly just like, oh, we want to put forth a good face. So let's just shove this under the rug and carry on. If
Mm-hmm.
that's how it really went, I have a hard time just kind of observing what I have with Laura to believe that she would not go through something like that without a fight, like where she wouldn't be like, let's
Mm-hmm.
nitpick everything, or I don't know, but maybe for her, somebody just being like, I'm wrong, you're right, is enough for her to be like, okay, happy. But that doesn't resolve
Yeah.
anything.
No, no, it doesn't seem like her at all. And even then later, like in the next episode, seeing his house and like the way that she was commenting about things, it was like, oh, his house actually is nice. I'm surprised, but it's clean in a serial killer kind of way, but in a good serial killer kind of way. It just, to me, felt very much like she does not like this person
Right.
anymore, and is having a hard time not like outwardly showing disdain for him. That's how
That's
it
what
felt to me. And then I was like, is she like that type of person who's just like pretty negative and nitpicky, or is she just done with him?
I, I think she was somebody where I was like, I think girl's done. Like,
Yeah.
I think she's done with him. Um, I don't even think I got the sense that she was doing this to further any sort of career or anything, but I could be wrong about this. I haven't really scoped out any of their social media. Um, but I did think on her side, it was interesting to me how many things she was like, oh, and this is outlawed, like his Hawaiian shirts and the motorcycle and acting in particular ways.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just trying to imagine if I was in a brand new relationship and somebody met me for the first time and they're also like, hey, I don't like these three things about you. Just don't do
Could
it
be
anymore.
difficult. Yeah.
Good.
I would hate to receive it. But I also
Yeah.
remember like prior to these episodes when they were first at the resort and he was like just like really being goofy in the
Yeah.
pool and she was very obviously annoyed and was saying like you're an idiot or whatever,
Yeah.
jokingly, but also maybe not. Um I felt like I can relate to her in that situation because I would find that annoying. I would not be attracted to that person either. But I think I would have figured it out in the pods that this was like too much of a goofball for me. Like, I want
Yeah.
to be the funny one. That is a step too far for me, that kind of personality. But I don't know. Like,
I have to
I feel
believe
like
it
people
came
don't
out.
show up like a
Mm.
Hawaiian shirt motorcyclist without any warning in the pods, you know?
I mean, you see it with I mean, Chelsea nailed that Trevor had a mullet. Like, how did she figure out she had a mullet? Well, because they've been talking for a while. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. She would have had to have seen some signs. And especially too, is she knew he was getting along very well with Sarah Ann, who's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
like chatty goofball herself. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I know they do evaluate things based on the other partners that person has picked out as their top one and two.
Mm-hmm.
But it really seemed like maybe a situation where Laura had just kind of like in her mind going, okay, this is the person I think he is. And now I'm going to hold
Mm-hmm.
you to this fantasy person I have in my head. And
Yeah.
that person does not wear Hawaiian shirts or ride on motorcycles. Oh, they can have one motorcycle,
Just one.
just one, but just one. No, not more than that. Um, but again, this is another area where I wish they would show people like working through actual issues because I
Mm-hmm.
do think it would be illustrative to the audience member to go, oh, this is how you work through a problem. Oh,
Right. Yeah.
right.
And I think that's what makes me feel like they aren't actually working through it. They're just sweeping it under the rug to move on and get through
Mm,
things.
yeah. Which I mean is just like a couple red flag, right? Like for a relationship, that is a red flag because if you actually wanted it for the long haul, this might stand out to you as something that to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I wonder if they weren't on the show, would they have broken up so much earlier than like in the process, then continuing to go through this? Like, would they just have like had the Hawaiian shirt and motorcycle conversation, then be like, we're done?
Oh, totally. I mean, can you imagine them going on an actual face-to-face date? Even if they were set up in a blind date, they would have showed up
No,
for the first date.
they
He
wouldn't
would have
want to go on
gotten
a
nervous.
second.
No, no, she would have just been like, nope,
She
carry
wouldn't have
on.
stayed for dinner. Like she is for sure the type of person who's like, I meet up for coffee or drinks, not a meal, so that I can leave or stay depending on how it goes. She would not have gone to
100%.
dinner. She
No.
would have had the drinks and then left.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually really loved the scene back in the women's quarter where she was talking about different way that she met men.
Oh
And
my
she's like, oh
gosh.
yeah, what was it like? Bumping into them at the grocery store was one option. Stare down at the bar.
Oh my
I don't
gosh.
remember the other
It
ones, but they
sounds
were
hard
pretty
to
funny.
date these days.
It does sound hard to date, but it was interesting to me to see some of like Ken and Brittany's conversations because I thought
Hmm.
Brittany in particular was good at like asking like really open-ended questions where she's like, I
Yeah.
really want to get to know this person. Tell me more about fill in the blank. And I
Hmm.
noticed that about her for sure.
I loved watching their conversations. Although it started to take a turn on the first episode that we're talking about, and then obviously, you know, fell apart on the second
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
But it felt like they were on such a good track, and they were my favorite couple. They were my
Yeah.
top couple throughout the show until these two episodes because I felt like they had a lot in common. They seemed like they were really good at talking through things. And then it kind of seemed like, well, maybe that was just her. Maybe it's just Brittany, who I
Yeah.
really, really admire. And Kenneth was along for the ride until he got his phone.
Maybe so. Well, it does make me think like, they of all the couples seem like they're still possibly in evaluation mode. Like, is this still the person for me? Am I, like, and it's okay if they're not, but let's ask the
Mm-hmm.
types of questions that we need to ask to see if we're there. And again, you might be right. It might have been her communication style, Brittany's communication style that like made me think that way. Um, But yeah, a lot of her questions were open. You had mentioned before Kenneth and AD had a conversation about like, okay, if you guys have kids, like, is she going to be
Mm-hmm.
prepared to raise a Black child? Like, and it seemed like we saw a snippet of that on the show. But my guess is that they had conversations about it off camera about
Mm-hmm.
how that would all, like, how it would go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think that they would. And it sounded like this was not her first time dating a Black man. Like she has very much had these thoughts and feels up for that. Um, and it seemed to me that she wasn't like, oh, that's irrelevant. It's totally going to be fine. It sounded like she was like, yeah, I want to hear your concerns. And I know
Mhm.
that there will be challenges, but I'm also here for it. I don't know. I felt like it was just a really well handled conversation on her part.
Yeah. Yeah, because I did see like some of that happening in the show. I can't even remember any examples right now where somebody would be like, I feel like this, or like, I feel afraid. And to learn more about the other person, you might be like, well, tell me more about what you're feeling afraid about. And a lot of the times, what you would be like, you'd see, which is totally fine, is, oh, yeah, me too. And then carry on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe you're not the same in your fears. Maybe you're not the same in the way that you feel. And you could learn a lot more about that person if you ask, like, okay, well, tell me more about how you're feeling and why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. Um, and this was another one where I thought, did Kenneth not really think in the pods, like think through, do I really want to marry a white woman? Or was he just like in the moment going through it? Because it seemed like that really shook him
Yeah.
when AD brought it up. And I was thinking, really? Like you didn't think about that before? I don't know. I feel like if that's a deal breaker, you should come into it thinking about
Yeah.
that.
Well, maybe again, it's one of those situations where he didn't know what he didn't know. Like maybe
True.
he really thought, like, love is truly
Yeah,
blind, sight unseen, all
so
good.
true.
Um, but maybe like Clay, it's like, oh, okay, now that this is in front of me and I'm
Mm,
evaluating from the reality of what's in front of me, maybe this isn't
yeah.
going to work for me. Maybe I'm not ready for this. Maybe it would
Mm-hmm.
be down the road. But right now, the
Yeah.
place I am in my life, he seems very career focused to
Yeah.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, obviously being in a relationship with somebody like Brittany, she wants his attention. And it just wasn't like it was almost like he didn't have the capacity for that either.
Yeah. And I guess this is something that I noticed that to me felt like a Britney flaw is maybe we didn't ever see it. We weren't shown it, but it seemed like she never outright had a conversation about the phone from any
Mm,
perspective other than like feeling like frustrated and like stomping around a little bit or being like, don't be on your phone so much. Like
yeah.
there was no like, hey, since we've been back, you've been on your phone a lot. And I understand that you've missed several weeks of work and you have a really important job and you have a lot to catch up on. But I also feel like I'm not seen right now. Like, how can we come to a resolution with this where you're able to get what you need and fulfill your obligations with your job, but also our relationship is healthy?
Mm,
It felt like she didn't ever approach it that way. So it made me wonder, like, is he even aware that she's feeling that way? Or is he just like so engrossed in what he's doing? And in his mind, he's like, well, this is my work. These people
right.
depend on me. And all I get from you is some nagging or like stomping around sometimes. Like, I'm trying to work. Don't you respect that? And it felt like
Yeah.
there's just like not a communication about that at all between them.
Yeah, that is such a good point because they didn't bring it up. It was very clear from her behavior. She did not like that.
Yeah.
Not
We
at all.
saw it. We were reading for signs.
We said, yeah, we're like, we see you, girl. Like, we got that.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it was one of those things where she just kind of thought he should know
Mm-hmm.
and he
Yeah.
did not know. And I think
Yeah.
it's easy to be in that space because I've definitely done this too, where I'm like, oh, because it's work and I'm not just scrolling Instagram, who knows what he was up to, but because it's
Mm-hmm.
work, it's justified. It's
Mm-hmm.
just as important as you, or, at times takes priority. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But yeah, that type of conversation probably would have been enlightening for her to be like, oh, this is how you think about phone use.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think it also could have been like maybe he was already checked out at that point or
It
just
could have
trying to,
been. I
yeah,
mean, he seemed like he was kind of checked out.
yeah. She's intuitive. She was already
Yeah.
like, how come you're not touching me? Like, what's up? What's up with
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it could have been an escape for him because I know, even if it is legitimate work on the phone, it's very easy to turn to that to check out if there's
Yes.
other stuff going on that you don't want to be engaged with or be thinking about. So I could see that.
Yeah. Not related to the show, but like how have you managed this in your own life? Because obviously, you run
Mm-hmm.
your own business and like you work with a lot of business owners. Like how do you help people navigate that kind of space of like being on and off?
Yeah, this comes up so much. It hasn't come up as much in my relationship. My husband's just kind of like, whatever you need to do to make the business work, you do. I have no problems with any of it, which is very nice that it just allows me to figure out what are the boundaries that I want to have. But with clients, that is very much an issue. Like I work almost exclusively with women. And
Mhm.
there have been a lot of them who are like, my husband really gets irritated if I'm on my phone, like ever at all. And it's like, okay, well, there has to be some kind of give and take. If
Yeah.
you are building your business from your phone, there is time needed on the computer or on the phone or whatever screen. So encouraging them to have that kind of a conversation, like the flip side of that
Mm.
conversation that I had talked about that Brittany should have had, um as far as like, here's what I'm doing on the phone, and here's why this is important to me, and also I want to make sure that you're seeing and our relationship is healthy, and let's talk about how we can have a balance. For me personally, I really like to have set work hours
Mm.
and then like a routine of like leaving the office and closing
Yes.
the door. And there's quite a few apps work related that I don't have on my phone. So I'm not checking in and I'm not obsessing.
Oh, that's smart.
I also feel like now I've been in my business for long enough that I really want an escape from it at the
Yeah.
end of the day. And so I really seek that out. And sometimes I'll do a quick check-in and not stress about it. I pay attention to how I'm feeling. And if
Yeah.
it feels like, oh, I have to do it, even though it's after hours, or like I have this urge to check out of whatever's going on and be engrossed in this instead, that to me is the red flag. If it's just like oh, I have a little downtime and I'm going to scroll a little bit and, oh, I'm going to chat with this person, like that to me is fine. So
Yeah.
I try to be relaxed about it, but also
Yeah.
really respectful of family and not being on my phone, at like family dinner,
Right.
family
Right.
event, holidays, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I wonder if it's just I think Ken's like 25 and like
Yeah.
maybe it's just like grew up with a phone
Mhm.
where it's just like, oh, this is just an extension of my body. So it is
Mhm.
fine. And I just like I think about that sometimes because I don't think I got my first phone until I don't know, mid maybe I started using one more consistently when I was like 29 or 30. Like it was
Mhm.
later days.
Mhm.
And so like it wasn't something that like I was like, oh, I have one at 12 or whatever age kids get
Mhm.
phones these days.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like I wonder, I mean, I'm hoping, let me just say this actually. I'm hoping that in watching the show and the edits that he got around his phone, I'm sure he is not alone in that practice. I think he just got that
Oh
edit.
yeah.
It would be a moment to be like, oh, I can see how this impacts things.
Yeah.
Maybe, maybe not.
And he seems to me introspective enough that I bet watching it back, he felt that and was like, oh, okay, I can see it through somebody else's eyes.
Yeah. And if he's not introspective enough, he is enough of a person that seems to care about what other people think about him that he might
Yes.
be like, okay, well, I'm not going to do this because I don't want them to think this about me. And it might be coming from a more negative place, but he
Yeah.
does seem
Whatever
to
it
like to
takes.
curate how he's seen, whatever it takes, Ken.
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, we're getting kind of to the end here. Is there anything else that we must talk about
Oh
before we
my
wrap up
gosh.
for the day?
We
I know
have
there's so
to talk
much.
about Chelsea and Jimmy
No,
and the clingy comment.
no. What did you think about this scene?
This is terrible.
Yeah,
The
right?
thing that like really set me off was after calling her clingy, and then she was like, seriously, like I watched your show with you, made you dinner, then we went upstairs and had sex. And he was like, well, I didn't even, you were the one who wanted to have sex. Like that is the most offensive thing. That would be a deal breaker. Like if that happened to me, I would be like, you get zero sex for the rest of your life from me. Goodbye. Never again do you touch me. So I just had like such a strong reaction watching it. I was
Yeah.
like, wow, this is clearly like a hot button issue for me.
We were watching the show with a bunch of people, and I'm pretty sure at that point we were all like, "Whoa!" Like Jimmy,
Yeah.
no, no, Jimmy, no.
Yeah.
And it was funny because you could almost see that he was trying to choose his words carefully, and then it just went off the cliff. Was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
we don't say this."
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think their conversations in particular, when we talk about people having conversations and not having healthy
Yeah.
disagreements or arguments, I was like, there's no editing that could lead me to believe this was an editing issue.
No, no. I think like they just genuinely are like on totally different pages, and it's been weird for me, like especially that particular conversation, then seeing so much hate of Chelsea online
Yeah.
and me being like, seriously, Jimmy is no angel. Like, what is happening? And I think for me, looking at Chelsea, I see so much anxious attachment. Like her
Yes.
attachment style is on display so loud and clear. Like she could be in a textbook about attachment styles. It's so obvious. And like we know that is not behavior you choose because you're a terrible manipulative person. Like Chelsea got programmed with that
Yeah.
from her past, like whatever happened with her. it, we know there was some rough things that now
Yes.
have her showing up this way in relationships and feeling like maybe sometimes clingy because she needs to get
Yeah.
that validation and to feel safe in the relationship. And it just like it definitely, she has a lot of blame in their dynamic, but I felt like my heart really went out to her because I could just
Yeah.
see the patterns.
Yeah. I think I have seen a lot of people online going, oh, okay, here's an example, everyone, of the anxious attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really seemed to me like after they met, like again, another couple where if they maybe went on one date would have been like, yeah, that was fun. Not again. Not doing that one
Yeah.
again. But now they're in this. Jimmy has this strong belief that once you say I love you, you stay with it. And wow, wow. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
just think like what they bring out of each other, like I think somebody could be in a relationship with one person that's anxious attachment style where they figure it out and they can heal in
Yeah.
relationship, right?
Yep.
I don't think they're doing that for each other.
Mm-mm.
They would have to maybe, I think, go to some sort of couple therapy or figure out language and how to speak to each other in order to move forward. I just don't think they're invested in each other in that way to lead to
Mm-hmm.
that result.
Yeah. And I
Mm,
kind of think like if it's that hard in the first few weeks
yes.
that you know each other, maybe you're not meant to be. Like there's people that it could just be easier with, not that you wouldn't need to work things out or go to
Yeah.
therapy, but like when it's that hard, I think it's telling you something.
I agree with that. I remember watching some group coaching a long time ago where they're like, if you're early days and you're having to coach yourself like more than like, a certain percentage of time, they're like, pretty much at that stage, you should be like 85% good, 15% your own, whatever you're bringing to it, the insecurities or whatever.
Yeah.
But like 85% of the time, you should probably be pretty good.
Yeah, and they're the opposite.
Opposite. It's like 15% of the time is good, and that's what they're holding strong to. Aw.
Yeah, yeah. And even when her friends came over and she was telling them about the experience, she was describing Trevor in this amazing way. And then her friends were confused like, wait, that's not the guy you picked?
Right? That's
Ah,
what I picked up on that too. I was like,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Oh man, I agree with you though that Jimmy should have been getting some more heat online because I mean they were both in this together for sure. Ugh.
Yes.
But nobody deserves the death threats, the hate, all the things. Like
Yes. I wish that could just not be a thing.
I
It's
know
so awful.
it's so awful. Well, there's so much on them as they go through the season, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But well, maybe leave it there for today since we're at
Yeah.
time and I know we could talk more crazy
Yeah,
stuff.
we could.
I'm
We
like,
just need to cut
oh,
ourselves off.
we're cutting ourselves off. Um, well, Samantha, if somebody wanted to find you online, where would they go looking?
Yeah, there's a few places. So I have a free Facebook group called Online Business Building Women. So they can look there, come listen to my podcast, Simple Online Business. I am also on Instagram at Samantha Siffring. And recently I've been very into threads. So if anybody
Hmm.
listening is also into threads, come connect with me there too.
Wow. That feels like a blast from the past, even though it just happened, like in the last, what, 6 months or something. I'm like, wow, that's so like retro of you. I
Well, I think it
love
feels
it.
like very early Twitter or something. So
Yeah.
it's like it is a blast from the past and it's kind of like a secret hideaway still. Like
Ooh.
it feels just kind of like quieter over there. Although there's been a few, weird things that I've seen, but I just like hide, mute, go away. But I've had a lot of love is blind conversations there.
Ooh. Ooh,
Mhm.
okay. Well, maybe you're turning back onto it. I'll have all of those links in the show notes. And then you mentioned your new book at the top of the
Mhm.
show. So we'll have a link in that too. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was so nice to get to know you in this context. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was so fun. And thank you again.
Thanks for having me.